We've been talking about community engagement. We've been talking about issues that exist in the community. This panel is about people and companies who have actually tackled some issue in the community using entrepreneurship. So this is kind of getting to the crux of what we're trying to get to. This panel is being headed by Dr. Forrest Sam Carter. He's the faculty director for the Institute of Entrepreneurship and associate professor of marketing at Michigan State University.
Thank you, David. Hello, how's everyone doing? Go green. That wasn't being provincial or anything. Green is the color of success, so this is an entrepreneurial activity. It's certainly my pleasure to moderate this panel. I think consistent with the theme of the symposium, these are 4 individuals and their firms that really are shocking the urban environment. So our goal of this particular session is to, one, hopefully inspire you by these individuals and their stories in terms of how urban issues can in fact be addressed profitably, and also to hopefully educate in a way to allow you to kind of pick their brains to see how they did in fact either innovate or reconfigure resources in a way to profitably sustain their particular business area as they address urban issues. So without any further ado, let me introduce the panelists. They're going to have about a 4 to 5 minute opening remark, kind of summarizing the problem they're addressing, looking at an overview of their particular business solution, and to some extent, again, how they innovated or reconfigured resources in a way that allows them to be successful. I'm going to encourage you to think of your questions. I'm going to keep my eye on the board here and make use of our technology to allow as many of you as possible to get questions answered. And so with that, we'll start looking here to my left. We have David Anderson, who's the co-founder of Bamboo Detroit. Many of you probably know David and know of Bamboo here. It's a co-working space here in Detroit for shared network resources. We also have at the next Anya Babbitt from Splitting Fares. She's founder and CEO. Splitting Fares is a company that's transforming the way individuals commute. I think their mission statement is transforming or connecting the commuter world, I believe. I think you'll be excited here. As I looked at the webpage, one of the true ride sharings, I know that other firm uses the term ride sharing, but they're more hailing sharing. I think that's a true ride-sharing activity. We then have Leslie Horn from 3 Squared, again, doing some really exciting things in the area of housing and other activities in terms of reconfiguring the way certain resources are used to impact the community. And at my far left at the end, we have Ralph Clark, my apologies, from Shotspotter, making some real impact through the use of technology on ways to keep our communities safe. So with that, we'll turn it over to Dave.
So how many of you have thought to yourselves, you know, I really love working in a cubicle around all these boring colors and drop ceilings and just to have a boring work environment? Anyone? Yeah, me either. So our basic premise behind starting Bamboo was no one likes to work in these environments. And a lot of times when you're starting a business, you end up working at home, you know, where it's not really conducive to work, or at a coffee shop, or, you know, you're just getting started so you can't really afford to rent out a large office space. So, where do those people go? When I go to other larger cities like New York or San Francisco, you heard from Miguel this morning with WeWork, and they have these options, these co-working spaces where people can go and kind of fill that gap. But what about places like Detroit? What about these urban cities that are currently being reurbanized, revitalized, and there's a lot of tension being put on them? So we started Bamboo 2 years ago, to fill that gap. And we got a great, we really got a really just good feedback, from getting started. So when we launched with about 15 members, spanning on different types of industries, from tech startups to photographers to nonprofit owners. And now we have over 100 members, and we're looking to expand. I think, aside from the space, we really provide a really inclusive and diverse community for folks to interact and get help with their business. And I think that's really the biggest selling point for our space and a lot of spaces like ours, is you want to interact with like-minded individuals that can help your business grow. So our membership starts at $99. We want to keep it affordable for everyone to have access to, and goes up to $199. And we just invite all types of people down to our space.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Dr. Forrest. That was probably a better vision statement than I think we have currently, so you're hired. And thanks to our Venture for America Fellow, who's employee number 1. Benjamin Seidman, will you stand up? He's the one responsible for introducing me today to this great group, so thank you, Ben. We are Split, and we're an enterprise ride-sharing platform designed to reinvent the commute and to allow people who are traveling to work along the same corridors to find each other along that path and share the ride into work. We've all experienced that dreaded commute and traffic and sitting on I-75 this morning coming in. And initially, when we first arrived in Detroit, we came from New York City, most recently went through Techstars Mobility here as the first inaugural class in Detroit, led by Ted Serbinsky. And we came in with a very different product. It was consumer-facing. It was a layer on top of taxis and other on-demand ride-sharing platforms. And it really wasn't until we arrived in Detroit and spoke with a lot of mentors, a lot of leading mobility chief officers and transportation industry experts, did we really realize and see a greater need to service those cities that are thin cities that don't have mass public transportation as a way to commute into work. So we then enhanced our model to focus on cities such as Detroit that really had a need for an enterprise platform to allow people to find each other and travel into work. And so it was really great to see this opportunity and to be here today to share with you that we do have customers who have signed up for Split, and how it works is that they pay us on a yearly basis and are able to deploy the Split platform to all of their employees. And we're live on Android, we're live on Apple as well, so you can check out our application. And right now in phase 1, we're focused on providing this service to employers, but in phase 2 and phase 3, the bigger vision is to become a multimodal platform, therefore enabling people to not only share the ride into work, but also to engage in peer-to-peer car sharing, bike rentals, as well as transportation bundling. So that is the broader vision of... Is it working now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Did anyone hear the last bit? No. So the broader vision of Split is to include a multi-mobility platform. And so that will be car sharing, bike sharing, transportation bundling, to really effectively enable people to not only share the ride into work, but also to be mobile when they are at work. And that includes initially within their own corporation, as well as cross-pollination of other corporations, so that people can effectively have a density and network effect to be able to commute into work, thereby reducing the number of cars on the road, reducing carbon emissions, in helping to facilitate and architect cities of the future to enable people to find each other and to change the way that we are meeting and connecting.
Leslie?
Great. Happy Friday, everyone. All right. Again, many thanks for allowing us to share our story with you. My name is Leslie Horn, CEO and founder of 3 Squared. Many of you probably know who we are. I'll lead into the story, and then you'll have the little light bulb that goes on if you don't already know. My brother and I started rehabbing houses here in the city of Detroit in 2005. We were doing it remotely, and I decided to move out here so that I could at least monitor and keep track of all the housing and the contractors and all of the team that we had in place. One of my contractors in 2007 said to me, "Leslie, have you seen all the shipping container construction going on in Europe?" I'm like, "Dude, what the hell are you talking about? Get back to work." He goes, "No, seriously." And I'm like, "I'm serious, go back to work." All right, and so I started doing some research about it. And more and more common in Europe in upcycling materials, in upcycling containers, a product that's been built, used, and often discarded or plugging up ports and landfills. So by the time we got our first project approved, it was in 2009 here in the city. We went through 18 public hearings, and at that time, no sense in building anything because of the market tanking, the real estate market. So what it afforded us to do was to kind of gather ourselves and repurpose ourselves as a company. So we were very proud to announce that in April of this year, we were able to erect our 3-story, 2,600 square foot building out of 9 containers in Corktown. And we were able to do it in 6 hours and 15 minutes. We told nobody we were doing it that day. So people driving to work saw an empty lot with some, construction people. At the end of the day, they saw a fully formed, fully built out frame of a 3-story, 2,400 square foot building. We were very proud of that. Some of the impetus in starting this is as we were rehabbing houses here in the city of Detroit, close to 30 of them in about a 2-year period, what we noticed is that our tenants had to make decisions during winter months. Do we pay the exorbitant heating bills, or do we pay rent, or do we feed our families? Well, what a horrible decision to have to make. So we have to, in our minds, create a solution, not only in how we house and how we live and create living spaces, but also in taking care of Mother Earth and our Earth's natural resources, eliminating trees, and literally upcycling products in order to build and make living spaces. So 3 Squared is coming into the marketplace now, where we're building much faster, way more energy efficient, and extremely strong. We can withstand 150 mile per hour winds without any additional pieces. And the great thing about this is it's an education piece for the community. We right now are almost finishing up phase 1, which is our model center. And as we move through this, we're being embraced by the Corktown community. Phase 2, we're building another project in Corktown and one in Woodbridge. So we've been embraced by the community. Now, we've had some naysayers and little haters who people don't get it or think it's ugly, or why can't you remove the dents out of the containers? Why do you have to do this and that? And obviously, it's not type of living for them. But what I promise you is that people are very excited. We're saving 50% on the time that you build, and we're getting to a point now in our research and development so that we can build a lot more cost, saving lots of money on the building aspect of it. And that's just going to come through economy of scale. But we're excited to be a part of Detroit. Detroit, we always feel, has been the mother of innovation, and we're excited to bring our innovation and shifting the way we think about construction and changing the way we think about our living spaces. So really thrilled to be here and really honored to share our story. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and let me add my thank you as well. And I also want to add an apology for standing in between all of us in lunch, so I'll try to be brief here. My name is Ralph Clark, and I work at a company called Shotspotter, which is a 20-year-old Silicon Valley-based startup. And we're a company that designs and deploys sensor-based networks to be able to detect, locate, and alert on outdoor urban gunfire in real time. And sadly, that's a very big issue. Typically, we're, I think, all very familiar with the narrative of gun violence is typically being tied to homicides and gunshot wound victims. But what we don't see is the real narrative that happens in all too many communities of guns being fired a significant amount. And when I say significant, I mean anywhere from 250 to 1,000 gunshots per square mile per year. Those are the types of incidents that we're capturing, where oftentimes the community is just so overwhelmed with that gun violence, they fail to call 911. And that happens probably 75 to 90% of the time. So you have a situation where guns are fired a lot. There's no police response because typically there isn't a call, and there's a significant schism between the community and the law enforcement that's compelled to protect it. So we try to get involved in that situation by providing a automated tool effectively for law enforcement to be made aware every single time a gun is fired in a way that allows them to respond in a very safe and efficient and effective way, thereby disrupting violence and reducing gun violence by building better community relations and being much more responsive. And that's it.
Fantastic. We're going to take questions now. I'm looking out to the audience, or if there aren't any. Well, maybe while there's one. Yes, sir.
So by the way of background, I would share with you, we're deployed in about 90 cities to date. Detroit is one of those cities. We have a very small 3 square mile deployment. And Detroit, like many cities, I think, part of the thing that we do, I think, is bring much more visibility to the issue of gun violence. And, in a very real, direct talk type of way, I would say that we bring a inconvenient truth, I think, to cities sometimes that would rather stick with the old narrative of gun violence, because of course if you're in a place like Oakland, California, which is where I was born and raised, if homicides are typically kept below 80 or so, they kind of confine to the areas that we care less about, sadly, involving perpetrators and victims that we don't care about at times of the day or times of the night we don't care about. It's easy to ignore. And we get very excited, of course, when we have a mass shooting event, but effectively mass shootings are happening by trigger pullers in our underserved communities everywhere. And I think to more directly answer the question about Detroit, I think Detroit's going to have to decide, is it willing to kind of embrace and step to this inconvenient truth of the gun violence that's happening in its community and really kind of embrace the technology and operating in a very different fashion in terms of having police show up when guns are fired and building better relations with communities by providing higher levels of service. And it's a bit of an evolutionary process we find with cities where we have to kind of nudge them to get there because, again, it requires law enforcement and municipal officials to kind of think differently and act differently. And that's, can be a bit challenging when you're dealing with something as late adopter oriented, I would say, as law enforcement typically.
Yeah, those are great questions. The insulation question is one of the top 2 questions we get every single day. We meet and exceed all building and safety codes. And you're spot on. Everybody thinks that because steel is a great transference of temperature. You have to deal with sweating, and then of course rust and things of that sort. We have dealt with those. We also have what we call trade secrets. We've got some provisional patents and patents pending right now. So that makes us unique and it increases the value of our company in moving forward. What we know is that the envelope, the insulative envelope in our buildings, and we can't wait to do the thermal testing on it because that's going to give us more data. But we've done about $500,000 in the last 2 years of research and development, so we've put our money where our mouth is so that we can live in it 365 days a year. We can even grow in it 365 days a year. And I'm just going to drop that little side hint. Anyway, but to your point, the manufactured side, yes, we're talking with a manufacturing firm. The challenge with an assembly line in manufacturing containers is that it's a twofold process. Step A, it takes a lot of time to clean, prep, and to do the enforcement of that all your engineering needs to have done to make it a sturdy house that meets and exceeds building and safety codes. You've got your assemblies and your fire assemblies and all those little doodahs that the city and of course, that we're mandated and pleased to do. The side note to that is that we, as a company, believe that we can put it into a manufactured setting. It would be a two-step process. We also believe that we can get the cost per square foot down so significant that it would replace manufactured homes as we know them today. Because as we know, those are the ones that float away in floods. They're the ones that get ripped up in tornadoes, and there should be no reason. All you would need to do in a hurricane or type of situation or tornado is literally you would need to open up a front window and a back window and then go down into your basement. Your home will still be standing. Here's the deal. You may have some damage to the exterior of your home from a tree or from those big trucks that the hurricanes pick up and throw, but it won't demolish your house. Containers by code are built to withstand 150 mile per hour winds and carry 60,000 pounds stacked 9 high by code. They meet and exceed all building and safety codes. We would be so lucky to have that in Tornado Alley. So great questions, thank you.
I'm going to get our questions on the board, so I'm going to just have the panel kind of address these two things as quickly as you can, but seems to be the top questions are kind of one, in your respective areas, what additional need do you see there being in Detroit in particular? And again, what failure did you have along the way? What challenge do you see in front of you to scale up? I know, Anya, you mentioned that there was a pivot in your progress. So if each of you could kind of speak to, what need do you see still in Detroit with respect to your area, a failure or a pivot point you had in your growth, and then looking forward, what challenges you see to scale your business up.
I'll address the failure question first, and I like to frame it around challenges. Right? So when we were first getting started, we did all the planning, to open our space. We bought the furniture, we did the design, we actually built out the space. And one of the last things that we would have anticipated having an issue with was internet, seeing as how we're located in the central business district, about a block from Ford Field. So about a month before we opened, I had a buddy of mine come down and check out the space, and we realized that there was no high-speed internet run to the building. So this is definitely a problem that's unique, to these urban areas. I couldn't imagine it being an issue anywhere else. So we had a DSL line, and we contacted some of the larger ISPs, and they quoted us $50,000 to run a high-speed internet line to the building from about 500 feet away. So, we're scrambling because we're going to open in, less than a month, and we ended up having to get some of those hotspots, that you carry around and use yourself individually, awesome. And that kind of filled the gap for us until, we could get actual high-speed internet. But that whole process took about 8 or 9 months, to get a cable line run just 500 feet. And these are the types of things that, I think collectively as a city, we have to look at solving a lot quicker. Mm-hmm. We found that the issue was due to some outdated regulations and laws in Detroit, some for good reasons, some for not. that due to some bad plans or city planning and not really keeping track of where all the lines are, without digging too much into the details, what typically happens is if you want to run an internet line, you will either open trench dig or you'll bore underground using a little machine. Well, the city of Detroit didn't allow us to bore underground, which would have been the cheaper option, because they don't really know what's underground. So, after some negotiating and going back and forth, we finally got a line run to the building, but that was after 8 months. But I think that really speaks to the pent-up demand that existed, for a co-working space, because people were willing to work with us, while we were kind of going through that issue. But now we have Rocket Fiber that's coming, so we're really excited to, partner with them and use their service as soon as possible.
Yes, we did. We had a pivot, what we like to call an enhancement to our model. And that was in New York City where the company started. Is my mic on?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. And so what we looked at initially was wanting to provide a way for citizens in New York City to meet and to share taxis or to share an Uber or a Lyft, any on-demand ride-sharing platform. And it would be the first time that people would have complete control over their ride-sharing experience, to the extent that they could choose who they were sharing that ride with, and they could pre-book their rides very similar to an airline model, while also receiving additional cost benefits, which would be less than taking an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi, by being able to share that ride with people who they chose. What we realized soon is that it's a bloody war out there between Uber and Lyft, and investors and advisors were really concerned that we would have a hard time carving a wedge in between those two dominant players, even if we were providing an additional social layer on top. So that was something that we really uncovered while living in Detroit. We've only been here 5 months, so I can't speak as articulately to the challenges, as we're still trying to really understand the identity of Detroit, and perhaps Detroit is still really trying to understand its own identity. But what we will say is what we've noticed is that if there aren't billions of dollars to put into mass public transportation, then how do you solve that problem? And we really believe that it's through technology and through innovation that we are able to solve for mobility. As well as we see the illiteracy rate in Detroit is staggering, to the extent that some will argue that it's a lack of education. We would argue that it's a lack of mobility. We've spoken to a lot of individuals in communities who have never even left their 3-block radius. So how do we really penetrate those communities and reach out to those individuals who are not mobile and where Uber is not currently going? And so in forming partnerships and working with other car sharing and ride sharing platforms, we believe that we can not only help bring economic development into Detroit, but also to help those who are already living in Detroit.
Yeah. I'm not going to choose one because we've had many. We don't call them failures. I think if we were to call them failures, every one of these panelists would not be up here. So the entrepreneurial spirit is how you choose to face these challenges. I concur with that name. We pay a lot of tuition in the last 2 years. That's what we choose to call it, because it's our learning curve. And you've got to stay in it, and you've got to embrace it. And on our model center, we had a significant amount of learning curves. And not just with us, with engineering and things of that sort, but also in dialogue with the city. This is the first project of its kind. So we are creating new codes. So our biggest challenge is, and we're really laying a strong foundation for cargo architecture to be built in this city. And it's about the dialogue and literally redefining codes, building codes and safety codes. We know that we meet and exceed, but you can't open a rule book, your ICD 9, 2009 or 12, whatever building codes, and find a specific assembly using cargo shipping containers. So that's been our biggest challenge. The problem solving, I think, is easy when you have the best team who's focused on the solution. And I would just encourage you to bring that into your sphere, and have different people who think differently than you, who think differently than the engineer, and people that don't like the word no. People that don't tell me no, just tell me how we can do it differently. So I think it's really in this entrepreneurial spirit, and when you take on something that either has been done and you're trying to recreate it, or really trying to invent a new wheel or getting it accepted into the city, it's really about your team. And we've been very blessed, very fortunate to attract the right team here. You know, people self-select on and off. We've gotten rid of a couple, but it's all good. It's all good. So there you go.
Great. So in Silicon Valley, I think there's a well-known challenge that many companies like ours face in terms of crossing the chasm. And what I mean by that is your early success is defined by those early customers that are typically early adopters. And those early adopter customers tend to have a very different point of view of your product or service and are willing to deal with a lot of friction related to your product or service. And so being able to be empathetic enough to understand and not, disrespect those early customers, but also figure out how to cross the chasm over into more of the early majority, late majority customer set that has much lower resistance around friction, cost, and risk, and solutions, et cetera, is really important. And for us, it was literally changing our business model, fairly strong pivot from a capital expenditure, perpetual software license at a very high price, to a managed services based in the cloud type of solution where we could de-risk the solution in a way that more risk-averse customers in the kind of later stage or more late majority could adopt and embrace. And what that meant for us was kind of taking on more risk, more financial risk, because now before we might have sold something at $250,000 a square mile, we effectively now are charging kind of $40,000 a square mile per year and taking more of what I would describe as kind of the long-term greedy approach, which is where you have to be very relationship focused and feel like you can own that customer relationship over a long period of time. And so that required us to, rethink how we capitalize the company, rethink how we position our product and service to that law enforcement community, reprice it, and the whole 9 yards. So I think there's a lesson there for almost any company to kind of think about, what your customers look like, and those early customers might not be the customers that are going to make you successful as you scale the business.
In early on, family, friends, and I forget the word they call, but it's fools, that's it. Oh, Lordy. But that first round allowed us to go in and engage into, and this is a business and securities attorney who has really held our hand over the last 6 years and guided us, 5 years, and guided us into the proper way of staging your funding and financing. And it's been a really huge challenge. As a startup and as a new developer, we don't have history. So we go to banks and they giggle at us. So we need to think creatively, oh Lordy, to bring in the financing. So it's, but we have to do it legally as well. So it's about creating the proper infrastructure to do it. Is crowdfunding your best source? Is a private placement memorandum? Convertible promissory notes. So our first one, the first tiny round, the seed round, was a convertible promissory note. Then we went into a Series A round of shares of stock. And I can share with you that there are people who have invested in us, 4 and 5 years ago, who never thought we'd actually, some of them said it was kind of like a little sympathy gift, like, oh, she's so passionate. But we'll never see that money ever again. And so you can imagine their excitement now that we're really coming to fruition. So I would take things very logically, and I would certainly embrace legal counsel. And there are attorneys who will do it and walk with you every step of the way and not break your bank. But I really highly recommend that.
That's a really good question. So to address the funding part initially, so we were pretty much bootstrapped from the beginning. I'm a very binary person. I'm either passionate about something or I'm not. Right? I'm either going to focus and go all in, or I'm not going to do it at all. And so we just said we're going to make this work however we possibly can. So the 15 initial members just kind of came from our our personal networks. We put out a few calls, and I don't think we ever set out to start what it's turned into, but we wanted to create a place where we could work. All the founders, I have 3 other partners. We were all working on different things, and we just said, hey, we need some space where we can kind of work around each other. And I'm sure there's some other people where we can, fulfill that need for them as well. And so, just making a few calls, we were able to get some commitments, that could cover our base expenses, and then just grow from there. But I think there are a lot of other funding opportunities. I mean, banks aren't going to look at most new businesses and
Right.
say, hey, here's money. But there are, some good options out there, such as the New Economy Initiative. They're doing a program called Any Ideas, where you can get, $10,000 for your business. There's other, foundations in the area that, are willing to work with small businesses. But I think if you really want to do it, then you'll get the traction and, you'll find the money from somewhere. Mm-hmm. So we actually haven't made too many hires. We work with interns, and the founders kind of just do all the work, but I can speak to that in a general sense. So my background is in engineering and technology, and I know that Michigan produces the most engineers per capita of any other state. And so what our problem historically has been is those engineers get trained here, they go to some of the best schools, and then they go to Silicon Valley, or they go to New York, or they go to DC or wherever. And I think, our biggest thing is going to be having, both the folks to hire, we don't want to work on anything boring, right? I want to work for an innovative company that's doing cool things. And so the people that are, creating these cool companies, like, heck, a shipping container company is really interesting, right? So if you can become sustainable, where you can put out that call to action to engineers and folks who want to work on cool solutions, then I think that provides the other end of that solution, where we can keep the engineers that are being produced here, and we can keep them here and stop the brain drain.
We've only got a couple of minutes left. I want to, if another one of the panelists want to address that issue.
Sure. Oh, go ahead.
Well, we are currently hiring, so if you know anyone who's looking for a position at Split, but I would agree with David, and in fact, Split was just admitted into the University of Michigan's Ross Financial Technology Commercialization Accelerator, and while there is this outpouring talent and migration of talent, I would say that there still is a large ecosystem of engineers, not only in Ann Arbor, but also in Detroit. We've doubled our staff since being in Detroit for the last 4 months, and have found in particular that Venture for America has been great at seeding us with talent, and that network alone has brought in 2 additional hires. So there is talent, it's a matter of finding that talent and then really selling them on the vision, since there isn't perhaps as much of a percentage of people looking for tech positions.
Well, with that, I simply like to say, I simply like to say thanks to the panelists. I know there are a few questions that we didn't get to. If there's some questions that I didn't see as we go through today, get those to me. The panelists have been so gracious to agree to allow me to write some case studies on their companies for David and the Institute's archive. So we hope to kind of document and start to build a research trail for these companies that are shocking the urban communities by addressing these problems with profitable businesses. I will say kind of one thing in closing, in terms of some common things that you might have heard, is this ability to engage. I often tell my students to follow your passion and make sure you marry the problem. You only date the ideas. And so the willingness to kind of change and evolve, to learn, and in essence let the marketplace kind of teach you how to be successful. And that kind of connects with some of the things we heard earlier with the importance of networks and building entities that could connect different networks to urban communities. So with that, on behalf of the panelists, I'd like to say thank you for your attention. And no, I won't say that. Thanks again.
Just creating the environment where you can get prospective business owners as well as existing business owners to talk about what can we do in the neighborhood in order for it to be a stronger business